What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, March 12th, 2019, getting into the middle of the month here, and we have got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions. So let's get right on into it because there's a lot going on. Venezuela is still trying to deal with this massive power outage, and of course Maduro and the Venezuelan government are saying it's a monster cyber attack. Plus apparently there's been some actual sabotage on the ground where certain facilities have actually been bombed now. Guido, of course, is saying, well, this is just a result of Maduro's corruption and incompetence. But I'm siding with those who think that this is a U.S. cyber war because the timing is just too cute. I mean, it came right after Elliot Abrams was outed for saying there was no direct military attack being planned. Now, the interesting thing that has evolved over the last couple of days here, it turns out that there was actually a U.S. plan back in the Bush era to take down Venezuela's power grid. And, just kind of this national lights out. The U.S. government response is, this is Maduro's fault. It's all Maduro's fault. But Kalev Litaru, actually writing in Forbes, stated that the United States remotely interfering with Venezuela's power grid is actually quite realistic. And this is based on a memo that came out in September 2010 that was authored by a U.S.-funded soft power organization that helped train Venezuelan coup leader Juan Guaido and his allies. And it identifies the collapse of the country's electrical sector as a watershed event that would likely have the impact of galvanizing public unrest in a way that no opposition group could ever hope to generate. Well, that memo certainly seems to have relevance today, but the analysis appears to be incorrect because the vast majority of the Venezuelan people do see this as a U.S. attack. So this is hardening their resolve to stand up. It is creating a lot of confusion, a lot of people dying in the hospitals as they run out of fuel for the emergency generators. Claire put up this photo the other day of this parent carrying a child who died in the hospital because the machinery all stopped working. But again, these people who plan these wars and conquest, and we're all going to get rich here. We've got stock in the oil companies and the defense contractors, and we don't really care who dies along the way here, because as long as we get more money, it doesn't really matter here. But more and more people are starting to write about the fact that this does appear to have been a massive cyber attack. South Front is out there basically talking about the failure at the Guri hydroelectric power plant, where something caused the turbines to shut down, to simply apply the brakes to stop working. And apparently the Cedar substation in Bolivar State was blown up. So they're still trying to deal with that, but every time they get the system almost back up and running, there's another problem. And Maduro is out there saying these electrical systems are being targeted by cyber attacks and infiltrators. And he said that Venezuela managed to restore power to many parts of the country on March 8, but the restored systems were knocked down again. So now the U.S. continues to reject these claims. We wouldn't do anything like that. I mean, real. How could you even think we would do something like that? And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo even claimed that Washington and its allies would not hurt the ordinary Venezuelans. Oh, and just who do those massive economic sanctions hurt, Mike? Anyway, all right. The Venezuelan government has given the U.S. diplomats 72 hours to get out of Venezuela. It's the final countdown. There was this little tit-for-tat going on where they were declared persona non grata and told to leave. Then Guido said, I'm in charge here. I demand that you stay. And Washington told the diplomats to stay. And yes, you could wind up in jail or you could wind up dead, but really it's for a noble cause. But basically, the diplomats are basically being told, 72 hours, get out of Venezuela, or bad things will happen to you. Guido, meanwhile, is now out there saying that he is willing to support a foreign intervention, which is confirmation again that the Venezuelan military did not, in fact, swing over to support him as he'd promised Mike Pence. So the situation down there is very dynamic, and it's just, again, like with all these U.S. interventions, it's just causing huge amounts of pain and suffering to the ordinary people of the country. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. We're talking about the crisis in Venezuela. And the European Parliament has decided to hold a plenary session on the Venezuela crisis. And basically, about the only thing they can do is side with the United States and say, oh, yes, it's got to be Juan Guaido. Oh, yeah, it's got to be Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido's got to be the president of Venezuela. Well, that's really up to the Venezuelan voters. And last year, they voted Maduro into power. Now, Russia, China, Mexico, and Turkey continue to recognize Maduro as the only legitimate president. But again, look at the arrogance that's coming in from all these other countries where, you know, forget what the voters of Venezuela want. We, the powers of, you know, these other nations, it's up to us to decide who's going to be the government of Venezuela. And it is a lot of arrogance there. And again, Russia continues to send a very strong message. They will defend their Venezuela oil assets in the toughest way possible. And of course, Russia is Maduro's staunchest international ally. So I think what Russia may be thinking about doing is turning Venezuela into the next Syria or into the next Venezuela. And in fact, years ago, when the U.S. started on this campaign of adventurism across the globe, Russia said its strategy to prevent this would be to tangle up the United States in wars of attrition and just grind them down, which apparently worked in Syria. It worked in Afghanistan. The U.S. is still stuck in Iraq. The U.S. is not really doing very well, even with its Saudi proxy in Yemen. This is already a failed policy, but the U.S. won't back off here. Over in Syria, in Dar al-Zawar, there's been yet another case of U.S.-led airstrikes killing civilians. And in this case, about 50 people were killed, scores injured, when U.S.-led warplanes targeted families fleeing the last vestiges of Daesh's territorial rule in the besieged village of Baghouz near the Iraqi border. Now, if these eyewitnesses are to be believed, the U.S.-led warplanes were targeting the fleeing civilians. And this comes just a few days after the U.S.-led coalition dropped white phosphorus bombs on Baghouz, leaving a number of civilians, mostly women and children, dead. And I'd like to remind everybody who's paying attention, the use of white phosphorus for anything other than a smokescreen is a war crime under international law. So, and another reminder, this one from Activist Post, that the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons report has basically come on out and said that the United States, France, and Great Britain were wrong to cruise missile Syria, claiming that the Syrian government had used chemical weapons in Douma in April of 2018. It did not happen. It's another case of Saddam's nuclear weapons. It's a lie. to say we're justified in blowing up other people's countries here. Yesterday, we were reporting on all the arm twisting the United States government is doing to other countries, to buy American. Don't you dare do business with these other countries. You will do business with us. And one of those countries, of course, is Turkey, which is looking at buying the Russian S-400 missile defense systems. And the U.S. came on back and said, well, if you dare buy from Russia, then we'll not sell you the F-35. And I guess the Turkish government has been taking a really good look at the F-35 because they came on back and said, okay, the S-400 missile defense systems, it's a done deal. It's going forward. Keep your F-35s. Over in Saudi Arabia, right now, they are the world's top arms buyer. They can't get enough of these weapons. And right now, having kicked up the Middle East into a war zone, the defense contractors are making oodles of bucks. And of course, the American defense contractors are getting angry that defense companies in other countries seem to be actually getting the deals now. But right now, Middle Eastern countries are buying more than a third of all global arms. And the biggest customer is Saudi Arabia, whose purchases have soared 192% over a 5-year period. They have almost doubled over 5 years. And of course, a lot of those weapons are being dumped on the people of Yemen, which makes the arms dealers complicit in these war crimes. But I guess if you're an arms dealer, you've long ago made that decision to say, yeah, okay, so I'm selling stuff that kills people and does, war crimes. It's a business. We're just making some money here. But I think it's time that we apply the liberal logic regarding guns to the arms dealers, because the liberal gun grabbers are out there insisting that the gun manufacturers and gun dealers share the blame for the crimes committed with the guns they sell. Okay, fair enough. Let's apply that to the arms dealers. And let's just say that finally, when we get to the end of all of this and a war crimes tribunal is convened, that the CEOs of all these defense contractors and all these major arms dealers are right up there in the docks with the military who actually committed the war crimes. That'll be a way to kind of calming all of this stuff down. But we're seeing all these innocent people, men, women, and children, who are not combatants. They're not part of the political structure. They're being killed and crippled, blown to bloody bits in this argument over oil, pipeline rights of way, and whose brand of ink and paper the world is going to use for the next 100 years. And it should make us all sick to consider what's going on, what the United States has become over the last 20 years here. Okay, Lindsey Graham is now out there and he's announced he's going to push for the United States to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, because just think of what Israel can do with all that oil and gas, which they've already sold, by the way. So Lindsey Graham is out there saying, I'm going to explain this to the administration, and if we could get Trump to move the embassy to Jerusalem, I'm sure we can get Trump to say that, yes, Israel now owns the Golan Heights. And to clarify for people who are not aware of the history, the Golan Heights is part of Syria, and technically it still is. It has been occupied by Israel since 1967. Now, Israel officially annexed the Golan Heights, but no other nation has recognized that. The rest of the nations of the world are saying, no, it's still part of Syria, and Israel really shouldn't be there. But Lindsey Graham is really pushing, and he's saying that Israel giving up the Golan Heights would be an Israeli strategic nightmare. Okay, well, here's your rifle, Lindsey. Here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. You watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Bashar al-Assad and tell him you're on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But the American people are tired of all these wars. We're tired of these wars bankrupting this nation, as illustrated by Trump's latest budget. We're tired of our children coming home in cheap metal boxes draped with American flags which are made in China, or coming home in wheelchairs or on crutches. Enough is enough is enough. These wars do not benefit the United States of America or the American people. They enrich privately owned corporations, stockholders, banks, and defense contractors. That's what it's really all about. Now, I have been trying to find some kind of confirmation about this story that came on out yesterday, where Syria had warned Israel that if they did not leave the Golan Heights, that Syria would attack Israel. And I was suspicious of this story because it seems out of character for Assad. And so far, I have been looking everywhere for this story, and every place it's reported, and it's being reported everywhere, it all tracks back to the same source, Israel World News. Now, we haven't had any comments from Syria, at least none that are being reported in the corporate media. We've had no statement from the United Nations, which supposedly acted as the conduit for this threat. And I think this is Israeli propaganda, mostly for the consumption of Israel's people, leading to some kind of a false flag, where there'll be a big bang somewhere in Israel. Israel will blame Syria on it, and Netanyahu will be off on another war that he hopes is going to reverse his election chances. And because at some point Syria is going to say, hey, we didn't actually say that, or the United Nations may say, no, we have no record this happened. The false flag's going to happen soon. In fact, to be honest, I'm surprised it didn't happen last night. But we'll see. Over at the Temple Mount, tensions are rising there. There continue to be clashes between the illegal settlers and the Palestinians. And apparently somebody set fire to a police post at the Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, and as a result, the police closed the Temple Mount following the firebomb attack. So we're coming up on the Israeli elections, and everybody's saying, will Netanyahu win? Will he prevail? You know, it doesn't really matter, because everybody else who's running, they're going to have exactly the same attitude toward the Palestinians and Palestine. Nothing will change. Everybody running in the election is firmly against a Palestinian state. That's got to be frustrating here. Story coming on out of Middle East Monitor. Israelis incite against Palestinians on social media every 66 seconds. Just out there constantly trying to enrage them, to inflame them, trying to provoke a response, which can then be pointed at as another example of those horrible, terrible Palestinians just behaving badly here. Now, this one could trigger a whole new intifada. Israel's Internal Security and Strategic Affairs Minister Gilad Erdan said yesterday that Jewish prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound may be planned in the future. Now, he made the remarks on Ben Caspit and Aiea Eldad's 103 FM talk show, and reported by the pro-settler news site Arutz Shiva. I was talking about these recent confrontations over Bab al-Rama, an area of the compound shuttered by Israeli occupation authorities in 2003. And Erdan pushed back against suggestions that Palestinians would be allowed to use the space. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, I've got my beggar's rags on here. Actually, this is the way I always dress. And we're asking for your help. You don't need me to tell you what a dangerous time this is. And you don't need me to tell you how much you're being lied to by corporate media and the government to get you to go along with their agenda of war and conquest. Independent media needs to continue to inform the people as to what's really going on here. And that means Republic Broadcasting. We don't have big corporate sponsors. We don't have foundations giving us money. We don't have any angels out there. Actually, to be very honest, we'd probably turn them down, because when somebody comes in with a huge amount of money, there's always strings attached. So we really do rely on you. So if you can help on out, the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. The network thanks you. Alrighty, getting on back to what's going on over in Israel and Palestine. Apparently, an unknown group of illegal Israeli settlers were spotted sealing shut the entrance to a Palestinian mosque yesterday with an unknown adhesive. And the colonists sealed the entrance to the Sheikh Maki Mosque in the old city of Jerusalem. And basically, they had to call in repairmen to remove the material. The doors were reopened. The matter was reported to the Israeli police, who came to the scene and took photographs of the door, and I'm sure that's probably the last we'll ever hear from them about this. So a lot of people are still talking about what's going on with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner and the so-called deal of the century. And more it looks like that Trump is simply going to offer a bribe to the Palestinian leadership for them to basically give up the right of return, to give up the idea of a Palestinian state, and just sort of forget about all those Israeli war crimes and bombings and everything. You guys are just so picky over there. And I can tell you right now, in my opinion, the Palestinians are going to turn them down flat. But Palestine right now is the world's longest colonial war. It's the world's largest open-air prison. It is this giant reminder of a constant, ongoing 12-year war crime. And what's amazing is that everybody who's out there saying we can bring peace to the Mideast don't want to address why there isn't peace. Jason Greenblatt is out there saying, well, you know, those West Bank settlements, they're not an obstacle to peace. You know, all the Palestinians have to do is just, sort of get used to the fact that Israel is building on their land. And I don't understand why they're so upset. Just because it's their land. I mean, that's the attitude here. Anyway, yesterday I put up all 4 parts of Al Jazeera's documentary on the Israel lobby here in the United States of America, which prompted a DOS attack on my server. But the word is getting on out here, and there's this article over at Information Clearinghouse just basically saying the Israel lobby's buying off of nearly every senior politician in the United States, facilitated by our system of legalized bribery, is not an anti-Semitic trope. It is an established fact. And then the article goes on to talk about the lobby's campaign of character assassination, smearing, blacklisting against anybody who defends Palestinian rights, including Jewish historian Norman Finkelstein and university students, many of them who are Jewish. That's not an anti-Semitic trope. It is a fact. 24 state governments' passage of Israel lobby-backed legislation requiring their workers and contractors under threat of loss of contract or dismissal to sign a pro-Israel oath and promise not to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is not an anti-Semitic trope. It is a fact. I think people are finally waking up. I think people are finally waking up that we live under foreign puppet rule. And polls are showing support for Israel among the American people, not just American Jews, but the American people as a whole. It's plunging. People aren't being scared off by anti-Semite and Jew hate and Nazi any longer. Israel overplayed those cards. They're worn out. We'll be right back after these few words. We got a caller on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones to Layla in Canada. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Mike, a lot of things, but I'll start with your comment about Norman Finkelstein, who's a remarkable gentleman. I met him when we invited him here to give a talk on what he calls the Holocaust industry.
Yes.
His parents had actually survived the Holocaust, and he was outraged, and he said his parents would be outraged if they knew what Israel was doing, not only reaping the unwarranted rewards of punitive funding that was being given to given out by various countries that were considered culpable of the Holocaust, but he said it wasn't even reaching the people who might actually have been victims of anti-Semitism or perhaps well-warranted resentment of some of the Jews in Europe. But he was hounded. His life was utterly destroyed. Every job he ever got, Alan Dershowitz was always leading the band to make sure that no university would hire him.
Yes.
And that has happened to a lot of the high-quality academics. So that's why I'm suspicious of people like Noam Chomsky, who claims to be a critic of Israel, but is still deeply ensconced in Harvard. And I don't know if you've had a chance, I'm sure you're swamped with emails, but did you see the email I sent you about Harvard University now including amongst its ancient Near Eastern languages and civilizations, they list a whole bunch that in the past were unknown about or ignored. They're now including Yiddish. Imagine Yiddish being a Near Eastern language and civilization.
I was under the impression that Yiddish was kind of something that sort of grew up, in Europe following the migration of the Ashkenazi out of Russia.
That's correct. That's what it is. And I went into the archives of the New York Times and found that they had been debating for years what was the source of Yiddish. Now, it's very similar in many ways with Old German.
Yes.
The Old High German and then Middle German. But it apparently also has a lot of borrowed Slavic loan words, or perhaps even more to its vocabulary than just a few loan words. And that explains why there are so many people that look like Celts, would have had Celtic, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, the whatever. It also, they claim in this archived article that I found, that they also had some Latin because a lot of the people who called themselves Jewish had become traders with traders, conducting mercantile activities with the Romans. Now, remember when I said that a lot of the slave traders used to follow the Roman army or any of the armies that were taking captives and then buying them cheaply so that the armies wouldn't have to feed and take. And then they would sell them at the auctions. The slave auctions for all these white-skinned people used to be in Babylon, in Jerusalem, in Constantinople, and also in Damascus. So and we know that these people who called themselves Jews in ancient times were one of the major slave traders, along with Arabs.
Yes.
The Arabs. So anyway, it's a disgrace that the very concept and then somewhere along the way they decided, well, the people who live in the Holy Land are not resurrecting their heritage and marketing it, so it's open. Where there's a vacuum, they filled it, and they claimed all the history that's in the Bible, that being that they were supposed to be the people, or the chosen people.
Yes.
I don't know how many times I heard that phrase ridiculed when I lived in Montreal, where, by the way, the killing of the 6 Muslims, and I know this is off track, and I apologize, but people don't know this about Quebec. Those 6 men who were killed in the mosque while they were praying, that was not anti-Semitism. That was Quebec nationalism at its worst. The FLQ, the Front for the Liberation of Quebec, in 1970, kidnapped 2 diplomats and killed them while they were demanding their independence from the rest of Canada so they could keep their culture and their language. And Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, the father of this guy, called out the war, installed the War Measures Act. We had tanks in the streets. So there's so many complications, so many layers of history. And I know a lot of people think that history is irrelevant. Why is this old woman going on yammering about history? The problem is, if you don't get to the initial source, you don't see the similarities, and you don't see how it's not different trends, but it's the same core principle that has influenced all the wars that have happened throughout not only the centuries, but the millennia. Now, there's one thing that I've rarely, if ever, heard discussed, and that is the secret Sykes-Picot Treaty of 1916. Have you been able to discuss it on your show?
No, we've never mentioned it before.
Okay, without the 1916 Sykes-Picot Treaty, there would never have been a 1917 Balfour Declaration. The Sykes-Picot Treaty, Sykes was working for the British, and Picot was obviously a French. The French and the British made a secret agreement in 1916 that they would take over the Ottoman Empire, and that they would, and then they already divided who was going to get which piece of territory, which would go to the French, which would go to the English. The Russian Empire was now fading, and it was not part of the treaty, but it did acquiesce in exchange for getting a warm water port.
Yes.
That was the one thing the Russian Empire always needed, was a warm water port. So the weak Russian Empire acceded silently to not blow the whistle on this 1916 Sykes-Picot Treaty, out of which there had already been the movements towards the 1917 Balfour Declaration, so that the British could get the support of the Rothschilds with all the money they needed, because, as you know, the Rothschilds always financed both sides,
yes,
hoping that if they killed each other adequately, they could just move in and take over the territory. And, of course, they succeeded in doing that. And parallel with that event, we had Supreme Court justices in the U.S. who were bribing presidents, because they were already Jews. They had risen in the ranks. They were also buying off and influencing Canadians here who were active at the United Nations, including Lester Pearson, Ivan Rand, who became a Supreme Court justice as a reward. And Lester Pearson, of course, got the Nobel Prize, because we have to remember the Rothschilds were friends with the Nobel brothers when they were all active in Akub, Azerbaijan. So it's such a very complicated, long series of histories. But anyway, amongst those people, there was the Khazarian, you can call it an empire, but what they were was mercenaries.
Yes.
They were a bunch of disaffected men who had no place, no need for their warrior skills, and they created this empire, and they would rent themselves out. This archived article in the New York Times found that many of the academics found that they were part Turkic, Turco-Slavic, with a bunch of other mixtures. They were almost like gypsies.
Yes.
Who formed a stable place. Now, the top echelon, the ruling echelon of the Khazars, included names like Kagan. Whenever you see a name Kagan, you know that is someone who probably unless they change their name. Anyone can claim a name somewhere along history and take it as their own. But the Kagan were the ruling elite of the Hazaris. But anyway, there was this 1916 treaty that pretty well put everything in motion. The British also, by the way, I know Mahatma Gandhi led a non-violent movement of throwing out the British. But the one thing we have to remember is it wasn't so much the magical charisma of Mahatma Gandhi, who, by the way, had very bizarre sexual practices and used to sleep with his nieces naked so he could prove that he could resist temptation. He was also a racist. Yeah, I mean, it was Indians who actually uncovered this in books, which have since been buried. But he also, when he fought in the Boer War with the British against the Zulus in South Africa, whatever part of South Africa it was then, he insisted, he was offended that the British would treat the East Indians like the black Africans, which he considered inferior.
Yes.
And he constantly insisted they should not have to use the same entrances and boxcars in trains as the black Africans, because the East Indian was equal to the white. But the East Indians were considered wogs along with the Arabs. But anyway, so he was a racist. Yes. Towards the blacks. He favored the caste system, which created the untouchables. But anyway, why did the British pull out of India? They were under siege everywhere.
Yes.
Remember, in 1947 is when they were also cooperating with the Zionists to create Palestine.
Well, the only reason the United States won the revolution was because Great Britain was tangled up elsewhere with their war with France and they just ran out of money and personnel. If Britain had not been so encumbered, we'd still be part of Great Britain today.
Including British North America. They were also fighting numerous wars. They did have allies amongst the native aboriginals who were brutal. We keep acting as though they were some kind of peaceful, mystical people, but they were not one people. They were many, many different ethnic groups or racial groups, because the oldest skeletons are proving to have been Caucasian, not Mongoloid.
Yes.
But anyway, the reason that they were able to do that, Lord Moyne, who was in Egypt, people don't know this. Britain, the reason the Muslim Brotherhood was created was because the British were so busy exploiting the Egyptian people and depriving them of their rights that there was not that some of them. I think his name was Sayyid Qutb. He was in prison when he started the Muslim Brotherhood, and that was to provide basic services to the poor Egyptian people who are being exploited by the British. But the irony is, who was it that assassinated Lord Moyne in his elegant mansion, Egyptian mansion that didn't belong to him? It was two Zionist activists for the Zionist movement, two men who were captured because, and they were actually captured by a policeman who was nearby on a motorcycle. They were tried and executed in Egypt, in Cairo. In the late 1970s, their bodies were brought back to Israel, and they were buried as heroes. And guess who provided the escort airplane to bring their bodies back to Tel Aviv to bury them in an honored cemetery? The United Nations. I mean,
boy,
let's remember.
That's a little out there. Okay, listen, Layla, sorry to cut you off. We're starting to wander very far afield, and everybody's very impressed with the breadth of your knowledge, including yours truly. We have another caller waiting on the line I need to get to. Before we go, I want to skip all the way back to the beginning when you were talking about how the ancient Israelites were basically grabbing other people's history and claiming it for their own. And it reminds me of an interesting story that came out a few years ago where the Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, I'm sure you probably remember the name, had basically come on out and said that whatever the Exodus actually was, and it wasn't what you saw in the movies, it happened to the Hyksos, not the Hebrews. And basically, the reason Pharaoh chased after them was that when the Hyksos were on their way out of Egypt, they were just looting and pillaging and plundering and killing on their way out. And so Pharaoh felt he had to deal with that. And then they got caught in the swamps and so forth and so on. The rest is, but again, this is an age in which there was no such thing as copyright. We know that the Epic of Gilgamesh was copied over for much of the Old Testament, and that
Sumerian, from Sumeria, actually from ancient Sumeria.
Yes,
the first civilization that we're aware of. But that man yesterday who called you and talked about how Egypt controlled the area where they claimed there was that kingdom of Israel and Judah, he was absolutely correct. Egypt had control over that whole area. That is why when the people of the sea, which were many evading or migrants who were coming away from climatic disasters and seeking refuge there, Egypt actually settled them in the land of Canaan, which is from the Egypt delta all the way up to Turkey. So Egypt actually had garrisons all through Canaan, and it is theorized, because there's no evidence of the Exodus, it is theorized to the extent that the Hebrews claim that they were actually, because they were under the overlordship of Egyptian puppets, that it was an internal revolt, and that is how they consider themselves unenslaved. It was actually Canaanites who were the first people who fought against the oppression of the Egyptians being the overlords. And by the way, the god Yahweh, Jehovah,
yes,
is believed to have been the patron god of the men who were the miners of tin in Canaan. So he was a Canaanite god. The word that they use today for God, rather than speaking the unspeakable name because it's so holy, Adon.
Yes.
Adon was a Canaanite god, and even the Greeks adopted Adon, and he became Adonis.
I thought Adon had been a slight variation on the Aten, which was from the Egypt's monotheistic period, and that Adonai, I mean, the I is a possessive. And this fits in with Sigmund Freud's theory that Moses was actually the deposed heretic pharaoh Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten. Anyway, listen.
And I actually with that personally, but anyway, yes, it's very complicated, and there are a lot of claims,
history is very complicated. They have the advantage of years over us. It's a couple of thousand years, and I'm only 66. So anyway, listen, Layla, got to let you go. Got to take a commercial break. We have another caller on the line who's been waiting very, very patiently, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right back to the phones to Don in the Philippines. And Don, I thank you very much for being so patient. Layla does have a tendency to sort of ramble on, and I try and keep her under control. I'm even getting some email complaints about it right now, that she needs to stay focused. Anyway, what's on your mind today?
Layla should write a book. Has she written any books?
I'm not aware if she has or has not, but you're right, she should. She's got her perspective on history.
Right.
I don't agree with
Nobody
all of it.
knows really. Nobody knows exactly what. That's why your show is a current event show. Nobody knows exactly what happened, even 50 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, and all that. I mean, it's all. She can talk about it, but if she sticks closer to the present time, she's more interesting, because she actually does know a lot about. She lived over there in the Middle East too, and she knows that. But anyway, I wanted to comment about your. You had a snippet in there about Bobby Fischer Against the World, a review of the movie.
Yes.
And it's true, Bobby Fischer was against Zionism. What happened was there was some radio show there in Brooklyn, and he tuned into it, the guy who talked about Zionism, and he became interested in it. But he's coming out, it's right now. I mean, people are starting to realize that this whole Israel controls a a lot of stuff. And Bobby Fischer knew this way back in his early years. Israel somehow wrested control of America from the Americans, and but one thing Bobby Fischer said in one of it. There's been a few documentaries about him. One thing that I remember he said, there's never been an adequate answer to this question is why do people talk to the FBI? And his mother trained him. His mother, I guess, was a communist. She trained him to never talk to the FBI and say. She trained him to say this one sentence to them: "I have nothing to say to you."
Yep.
And that way, they can't get him for perjury. He can't. If he would say, "Well, I don't remember that," then they can come back and accuse him. Well, you did remember this or whatever. If you just say, "I have nothing to say to you," and he had to memorize that, and he said this when these guys came around his house and asking questions and stuff. And I can never understand why these people talk to the FBI. There's so many of these people in this recent Mueller investigation. They all got charged with the same thing, lying to the FBI. If they would not say a word to them, they would not be charged with lying. There's no way you could charge somebody with lying if they remain silent. And Bobby Fischer knew this at an early age. And he was a smart guy. I don't know exactly why you put that snippet in there about the movie, but he was an interesting.
Mostly because Bobby Fischer was this huge, very famous chess champion, and he had this great career. And then he went public with his opinions about Israel and the Holocaust, and he just evaporated. And we've seen that happen to so many people through the years. Anyway, Don, got to let you go. Got to do station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. And let's get back onto the news here. Still talking about Israel and Palestine here. And not too long ago, there was an Israeli reporter, Ashrat Kotler, who made the comment saying, when you send your children to the army, they are kids. You send them to the territories, and they come back as human animals. That is the result of the occupation. Now, of course, Kotler's words triggered a political storm and a media campaign against her, and trying to get her fired from her job, the usual things that we see. But what's really interesting is we're actually starting to see Israeli media and Israelis themselves start to stand up and say, there's a problem here. Just like we're starting to see members of Congress stand up and say, there's something wrong here, and we can't pretend it's not a problem any longer. It's time to fix it here. Now, one of the things that Netanyahu likes to talk about all the time, and he's been using it during his political campaign, about how Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, maybe not, because not too long ago, Netanyahu declared on social media that Israel is not a state of all its citizens. And he basically came on out saying the nation state, not of all of its citizens, but only of the Jewish people. Well, that doesn't sound like a democracy to me. Sounds like apartheid, to be very honest. And in the upcoming elections, Israel has banned Arab parties and a liberal candidate from the coming elections. How can you have a democracy if the candidates are being pre-screened and pre-filtered? Something that we should be looking at for our own American elections here. Meanwhile, Gantz has already declared that he's willing to sit in government with anyone Jewish and Zionist, and apparently he's ruling out any possibility of a coalition deal with Arab parties. That doesn't sound like democracy to me at all. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Actually, I didn't really want to talk about Israel, but I will mention there's all these billboards going up all over Israel showing Netanyahu and a whole bunch of political people giving the finger to just people who look at the billboards, the ads.
Yep.
It's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. So there is a movement in Israel, but is it strong enough to really make any changes? Probably not, but it is a first step, That's probably all you can do, right, if you live over there? Unless they all came out in mass and, knocked the wall down. Otherwise, that report of, remember the wall, parts of the wall was collapsing? Maybe they need more money from the U.S. government.
Well, they're always. It's not that they need money from the U.S. government; they just want it.
Yeah, but Mike, I wanted to mention that Turkey with the S-400 deal. Yeah, they don't want the Patriot missiles now or the F-35 because they says they're willing to do deals with the Su-35 Russian air superiority fighter and the Su-57, which is actually not out yet in Russia. I think they take delivery of 2 this year. But so there's that pivot of Turkey to the east,
Yes.
not to the west. You know, and
well, Turkey's hardly alone with that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that other nations don't feel they can trust the U.S. government anymore, which has got a bad habit of breaking treaties. They're afraid of the U.S. government, which is going around the world trying to impose its will on other countries, primarily with economic war, sanctions and tariffs, which is causing a huge amount of hardship. And the bottom line is that the United States doesn't manufacture things other countries want, and they don't want our agriculture. And the United States government, instead of saying, let's improve our manufacturing and let's clean up our agriculture, they're out there acting like gangsters, you know, arm twisting and saying, don't you dare do business with China's One Belt, One Road, Italy. Don't you dare do business with Russia, Turkey, and on and so forth and so on. And I don't see the rest of the world responding favorably to that.
Or China's Huawei. That's another one they don't want you to do the business with. Hey, Mike, you know, one thing that is really odd about this Boeing situation with these planes being grounded. Now the EU is saying they're going to ground all. There was like an incident over Romania where the plane turned real quick. So now the EU, I think, has said to ground all 737s. Do you think there's a part of an economic warfare aspect to not with the planes being grounded, but since the planes are grounded, you know, we have these Airbuses over here. You know what I mean?
Oh,
because,
yeah.
you know,
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, everybody's looking at the situation from their own points of view, and you know, this is definitely going to be a huge boost for Airbus, and it's a major hit on Boeing. And you're right. There was this Tel Aviv-bound Norwegian Boeing 737 MAX basically had to turn around when the Norwegian Airlines announced that they were going to immediately ground the flights. Federal Transport Minister Schur up in Germany is grounding the 737 MAX 8. In fact, he's forbidding it to even enter German airspace. You can't even fly across Germany in that. British flights are banned here. Singapore, Australia. It's just going on and on. Now, the reason this plane seems to be a problem is Boeing realized they needed a newer, updated version of a mid-range commuter jet. And rather than develop a new one from scratch, which is expensive, they said, well, we'll just doctor up the 737. And the new engines had a problem fitting underneath the wings. And so they made the nose landing gear longer to create more distance, and the new engines were mounted further outboard from the fuselage. And that changed the plane's aerodynamics, and it also makes the plane potentially much more unstable if there's a flame out. So in order to deal with this, Boeing installed this system called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, which automatically lowers the nose to head off a compressor stall. This is new information that's just now coming on out here. But Boeing failed to basically communicate this system to pilots and incorporate it into regular training programs. And this appears to be the cause of these pilots literally fighting a battle, trying to keep the plane, going upward, while the plane itself kept trying to basically put the nose down. So this is clearly a design flaw, and I'm sure a software error is going to be able to fix it, but the damage is pretty much done. Of course, you don't need to worry, because here in the United States of America, the FAA insists the 737 MAX is perfectly airworthy, and all U.S. carriers are going to continue using it because we have to protect Boeing's profits after all. And I don't know about you, but have you noticed that all those booths that sold flight insurance at the airports have all gone away? So,
yep.
But
Mike, I got one more thing to say about
okay.
Well, I wanted to skip gears actually. I wanted to talk about that admissions scandal. You'll probably talk about later with the colleges.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about that later.
But I wanted to ask you something. All right. Well, in February, I brought this up the other day with the 20,000 jobs that were added. How do you go if the jobs situation is so great from all these months, them claiming 180,000, 180,000, and all of a sudden, February, boom, 20,000 added only? I mean, I want people to think about that. Something's not right. You know, I mean, you don't have that many little jobs added if all those other months you've been adding all these other jobs.
Well, do you remember we talked about the propaganda that was being put on out, that the reason for the lower hiring rate was that employers simply couldn't find workers, and and that was the reason for the lower numbers.
And let's not listen to Larry Kudlow saying, that's flaky number. Just don't listen to that number. Listen, what? He's a joke. All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And we're finishing up on the situation with Israel and Palestine. And there's an article over at uns.com basically saying that no, dual loyalty isn't okay. And it's never really worked out. And people up on Capitol Hill, they're terrified of the expression dual loyalty because it implies that one is not completely loyal to the country in which one is born, raised, prospered, and, let us be honest, making the laws for. It's suggesting something more perverse, and that is dual citizenship and dual loyalty. I mean, it's even back there in the Bible. No man can serve two masters, because after a while he will love one and hate the other. And looking at the voting record in Congress, it's obvious there are a lot of Congress critters who embrace dual loyalty. And they are voting through laws to serve a foreign master, such as all these laws saying that state contractors and employees have to sign a loyalty oath to Israel and promise not to support boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Anyway, as I mentioned before, the new Gallup poll released is showing that support for Israel here in the United States is at its lowest point in a decade. And I think we've reached the point where everything Israel tries to do to improve its image is going to fall flat on its face. Because if you look at the tactics Israel employs that were illustrated in that Al Jazeera documentary, The Lobby, people now know this is being done. They're not going to respond to that. And they're not going to respond to yet another flood of reruns of World War II Holocaust movies all over the cable boxes. And we know that Israel is the master of the false flag. They love to play for sympathy. They love to hurt their own people and say, see, we're the victims. Send us more money. All righty, looking at the Balkans, there's a little bit of tension over there. They're getting ready to redraw the borders between Central and West Balkans, and it's basically going to be a land swap. Now, so far the talk appears to be very peaceful, and they're hoping this proposal will cool off the present greater Albanian escalation. As you know, they're having riots in Albania. but the debate surrounding it reveals that the United States plans to further hack Serbia down in size as punishment for its continued defiance of the imperial White House. And Russia, on the other hand, entirely supports all of Belgrade's initiatives and their right to defense. And there is a serious arms race underway. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has issued a press release saying that she has invited NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to address a joint meeting of Congress on April 3rd. Now, they're not really saying what it's about, but my guess it's going to be about, we all have to get ready to deter Russian aggression in Europe. Well, Russia's not the one who's aggressing. They haven't gone across their borders. They haven't gone into other countries other than to help those countries defend themselves. Now, here's an interesting little story. It's coming out of Sputnik News. The U.S. Department of Defense revealed this week that it is getting ready to test the ground-launched cruise missile systems once banned by the INF Treaty. And what's really interesting is knowing what the lead times are on weapons development. This article is implying that at least some of the preparatory work for this weapons system was started long before Trump pulled out of the INF Treaty. That they've already got the blueprints, they've already got the tools, the jigs ready to go. Meanwhile, Russia is carrying out the first Navy launch tests of its so-called unstoppable hypersonic missile, which is, again, something that the United States is simply not prepared to deal with. And don't forget that story we ran yesterday about the Rand Corporation running these war game simulations of war between the United States and Russia, war between the United States and China, war between the United States and both of them, and the U.S. gets its rear end handed to it time after time after time after time. Despite all that money, that vast sum of money spent on the Defense Department, we're going to lose this world war. And on the day when the U.S. government realizes they cannot win a conventional war against Russia and China, that's when the nuclear missiles will get launched. So, little article that came out of Zero Hedge here, talking about how the revolution has no Hollywood ending, because basically we're looking at one of two outcomes. Either we're going to blow ourselves up, or we're going to evolve beyond our self-destructive tendencies and really try and build a better world, neither of which works in a Hollywood blockbuster. Okay. Marco Rubio came on out. He's been tweeting all over the place about what's going on in Venezuela, and a lot of people are very troubled by his tweets. He seems to think this is all fun. Yes, the people are suffering, they're starving, the food is rotting in the refrigerators, yeehaw, it's, great time here. But he came on out with this tweet on Sunday reporting that a transformer explosion at the German dam in Bolivar State caused another massive blackout. It turns out that German dam was actually the name of the reporter who reported on the transformer explosion. So, the Caracas Metro remains out of service. Very few flights have arrived or departed from Caracas over the last 20 hours. And Rubio thinks this is just so cool. It's so wonderful. I'm having so much fun watching this here. Okay, Stephen Biegun, the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, is out there reiterating that the administration wants North Korea to give up all of its weapons of mass destruction before anything else. They're saying there will be no incrementalism, that North Korea is, you give us all what we want, then we'll do nice for you. And the Trump administration is also wants the complete removal of all chemical and biological weapons from North Korea. meaning the U.S. wants Pyongyang only to have conventional weapons by the end of the process. You know, things that the United States can roll over very quickly when we want to. And it's rather hypocritical for the United States to be talking about North Korea giving up chemical weapons after showering that Syrian village with white phosphorus. All right, let's talk about our domestic politics here. A former member of the Federal Election Commission is basically saying there is enough evidence to open a criminal investigation into Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her top aide Saikat Chakrabarti for some mishandling of campaign funds. Now, the Daily Caller News Foundation reported last week that Ocasio-Cortez and Chakrabarti have since December 2017 held legal authority over Justice Democrats, the outside PAC that's been credited with manufacturing her upset primary victory over Joe Crowley in June 2018. She broke the rules. She basically broke the rules. It will be interesting to see if another Democrat gets investigated. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about domestic politics. And Jeb Bush's super PAC just got hit with a massive Federal Election Commission fine, $390,000, for illegally accepting $1.3 million in donations from Chinese-owned corporation American Public International Capital during the 2016 presidential primary. And yes, some of us remember Jeb Bush did run in that primary very briefly and pretty quickly flamed on out there. So apparently, Campaign Legal Center, which is a watchdog group, filed a formal complaint with the FEC in August of 2016, citing a report from The Intercept detailing how Chinese businessmen were illegally funneling money to Jeb Bush's PAC, Right to Rise USA. And, you know, it's an issue. I mean, the Clintons were doing it back, you know, during, I think it was 1994, just before Clinton's second campaign here. Now, as you know, there was this big fight in Congress over this bill to basically say hate is bad, which we all sort of kind of knew to begin with. And originally it was supposed to be a House resolution to condemn Representative Ilhan Omar for her comments about AIPAC, to denounce them as anti-Semitism and Jew hate, which they weren't. She was stating a fact that we all know is true. AIPAC wields tremendous influence over the Congress of the United States of America. So after a while, the bill got pushed back and forth, and then it was sort of watered down to condemning all forms of anti-Semitism. That didn't fly. And then finally they said, well, we're going to denounce hatred against all of these special privileged minority groups like Muslims and so forth, and that was the bill that finally passed. And Nancy Pelosi is drawing criticism for not having forced through the bill, specifically attacking Ilhan Omar, or at least keeping the bill narrowed to target only anti-Semitism. And so this article came on out from townhall.com. Has Nervous Nancy lost control of her crazy party? Well, there is no question that the House Speaker has a tremendous amount of control of the House of Representatives, but she's not supposed to be in control of the Democratic Party. These are all individual legislators who are, at least in theory, answerable to their constituents. And again, it just illustrates how that Israel-esque perspective dominates the discussions here. All right, another story that's out of Blacklisted News. We mentioned this briefly yesterday, but apparently the Manhattan Appeals Court has given billionaire pedophile Jeff Epstein's former alleged partner in crime, British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, until March 19th to show cause as to why documents detailing the scope and size of their international child sex trafficking operation should remain sealed. And if she's unable to do so, the documents will be made public, which will be very interesting. Now, for those who don't remember, Ghislaine Maxwell was this British socialite. She was actually, if you will, the pimp. She was the one who went around recruiting underage girls to get involved with this operation. And I guess they were dazzled by her wealth and her glamour, and they sort of got sucked into it. And apparently, a lot of corporate media is getting ready to go to press with these papers. Now, there's a downside to this. They may be getting ready to make a big deal over the Epstein papers, hoping to find something involving Trump. And there may be something in there doing that will be very damaging to him. Now, Nancy Pelosi is basically waving off impeachment, says it would divide the country, and basically saying he's just not worth it. And this has rankled some of the more extreme leftists. Say, no, do it now. Start the proceedings. But Pelosi was interviewed in the Washington Post and said, I'm not for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path. Now, I understand what Nancy Pelosi is thinking. First of all, I think an attempt at an impeachment could trigger massive civil unrest. But I think the reason Pelosi is backing off impeachment is that so far they've got nothing to impeach Trump for. And it doesn't look like the Mueller report is going to provide that. And in any event, the House could impeach Trump. The Senate will not remove him, which would make the impeachment effort appear to be a failure or a defeat for the Democrats. So Pelosi is playing politics on that. And again, we're seeing a Congress that is so taken up with their own infighting that they're just ignoring the rest of the country. Except for the wars in Israel. They keep an eye on those. All right, we're going to be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're going to go right back to the phones here to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. There's never a dull moment these days. I'll tell you what. Called about that whole college entry thingy scandal. Real quick before I get to that, with regards to Nancy Pelosi, okay, if I am elected Speaker of the House, we will revisit the issue of impeachment of Trump. Suddenly, all of a sudden, he's not worth it. Sound like anyone you know?
Well, basically what's going on here, like I said, she doesn't want to impeach and have the Senate not remove. It will be seen as a failure.
Well, I was referring specifically to Donald Trump. With one of the first things I will do if elected is have instruct my Department of Justice heads to begin investigations into the Clinton Foundation. And as soon as elected, I think they've suffered enough. That was my reference there.
Okay. I see the. Yeah, it does sound like it. It really does sound like it.
Typical politician there. It's all BS. And but with regards to this whole scandal with we'll have them. We'll take these fake photos of them doing athletics and whatever, get them in a athletic scholarship, and then just fake an injury or whatever it takes to get you out of that. But now you're still in college, and it's all good and gravy. Well, one of the things, and I heard this reported earlier on another broadcast here in one of our local talk radio station, where it was discussing how people who get these sports scholarships, the standards are lower because they're getting in on a sports scholarship, which means they don't have to meet the higher requirements of those who are going strictly academic.
Yes.
So this is another typical case of lower the standard. And the one thing that really bothered me was Rush Limbaugh today talking about this, and he said this is the liberal Democrat pushing white privilege. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I could see where he might be saying that, except that most of these college athletic scholarships aren't going to white people.
I just thought it was really interesting to hear him and, of course, one of our local personalities here who actually lives in Augusta, Georgia. They're both saying pretty much the same thing. I kind of, and I'm thinking, this isn't about white privilege, although most of these who are caught up in this scandal do happen to be white. This is a case of literally making it easier for those who don't want to put in the work and the effort, but yet need to get them into college so we can get those student loans and create a little bit more debt. And that's the way I see it.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, because you need to understand how many colleges actually turn a profit over on their athletic programs. It's a big moneymaker for them, and that's why there's such an effort to go on out there and recruit these great athletes coming out of high school and get them on their teams.
Well, one of the things I thought really interesting as well was, I was hearing names like Harvard and Yale, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, aren't these like the Ivy League, the creme de la creme, with the really high standards? Why would they be why would anyone within their staff, be it the sports coordinators or whoever it might happen to be, why would they risk a reputation of being a high standard Ivy League school for the sake of this just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that out. I'm trying to make some sense of it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Something just, they say, the old saying, something doesn't smell right in Denmark. Anyway,
Yes.
Thanks, Mike, and everyone.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and before we take our next phone call, there's a story that's just breaking. It was on Sputnik. Sputnik's taken it down. It's still over on an Indian news website, and it's being reported by Jim Stone that Venezuela has arrested 2 people at the Guri Dam power plant, and apparently they were caught with flash drives with virus code on them. So I can imagine that the corporate media is going to be trying to keep a lid on that one as hard as they can. All right, let's go to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, on Venezuela, real quick, I saw a real heartbreaking picture today of a mother having to carry her dead daughter to the morgue because she died in the hospital because they didn't have any power. And to think of Rubio and anybody else applauding the suffering that's happening to those people, he's a sick man, and I'm glad he's not president, and I hope the people of Florida vote him out. As far as these colleges, it's really been a bad day for colleges today because not only did you find out about the scandal and the admissions, and it's really all about money, and Rush Limbaugh is right in that it's white privilege for the privileged. When it comes to getting into these big colleges, there's special ways that rich people and connected people get their kids into these schools. It's always been that way, and it always will be that way. And that's part of the reason, as a libertarian right winger, I'm really angry at the college system. I'm angry at the fact that they're just become social justice warrior training grounds, and 70% of the millennials believe in socialism. Well, where are they getting that? They're getting it from these phony college educations they're getting.
Yes, so, they are.
I'm glad to see Trump basically going to war on 2 fronts with the colleges today. One, he says that if students default on their college loans, that the colleges are going to have to pay for it. The government's not going to pay for it. And that's great because they just throw money around, and these colleges, they need to cut, their costs. And the other thing he said is that colleges that don't allow free speech on campus are going to lose federal funding, and that's also another great thing to hear, and something that I've been waiting for a real long time to see.
Well, I'm cautious about that last one. I want to see the exact wording of what Trump is saying about freedom of speech on college campuses, because I'm expecting there to be some kind of a loophole through which, Israel's speech is protected, but Palestinian speech or pro-Palestinian speech or anti-Israel speech is going to be exempt.
That's a very good point. I didn't even think of that. So you're right. The whole BDS movement and all the anti-Zionist stuff. But at the same time, it's a shot across the bow, because they've been getting away with suppressing speech of conservatives and Palestinian rights activists for a long time, and it's about time that we've done something. I mean, it's almost too late. I mean, they've polluted the minds of a whole generation, and we're going to have to deal with it. This whole pro-socialism, social justice warrior thing is very destructive. And to destroy minds like that at institutions that are supposed to, take minds and mold them and teach them how to think, is really, and to have us paying for it, it's really, it's horrible. It's just, well, I'm glad to see.
I think the attitude basically is, these are people who are used to simply paying their way through life. You pay enough money, you get into college. You pay enough money, you get a nice cushy job, at the family business. And so, they can spend their college years, partying it up and getting involved in all these social justice causes and not worry about, getting an actual usable education. And it is a perversion of the system. It's sort of the ultimate dead-end result of what was called the Prussian model of education.
Well, like you say, you're supposed to be, go away to university and be enlightened and learn how to think, and that's not what's happening. You're better off not letting your kids go to college unless it's going to be for a science degree or a practical degree. But if you let them go and they're taking black studies or women's studies or any of these social justice warrior, malcontent courses, it's just you're not only wasting money, but you're destroying your child's brain. I mean, they come back and they hate their father. They might as well come back with a bone in their nose. It's very sad to see. And I've heard stories of my friends where their daughters would go away to college and that would be the end of them.
Yeah.
And it's really to think that they're actually using our education system to destroy young minds is it's sickening, and I'm glad that finally that we're going to start the fight on this. I forgot who said that we have to start defunding the left and their institutions, and starting to do that with the colleges would be a really nice start, and they really deserve it for what they've done.
Well, I mean, college tuition has skyrocketed way out of proportion with the rate of inflation. So they have managed to acquire a huge amount of money, much of it from student loans. And of course, the colleges will resist having to absorb those losses when the loans default. And of course, for these kids, they're going to be driven into bankruptcy at a very young age. And far from helping them get a step up in life, their college experience is actually going to knock them down onto their knees.
Well, you notice how there's no, the left's always for controlling the prices of prescription drugs and controlling the prices of medicine, but they never bring up controlling the prices of education. They want to socialize it, but they never talk about cutting back, because that's like the left's, it's their territory, it's their game. So, of course, they'll never want to cut back on money spent in the college systems and the education systems, because they rule that, But at the same time, we have to understand that that's the enemy of the American people, not just the media, but the college system.
Do you remember that story we had yesterday, where it turned out that more than 25% of all kids in college have been diagnosed with a mental health issue, which means these kids have been given prescription psychiatric medication, which could go a long way to explaining their very bizarre behavior, being triggered and screaming and crying just all this kind of stuff. I never saw this kind of behavior when I went to college, and I'm pretty sure that any people of my age are going to say the same thing. If there were protests and demonstrations, they were calm and polite, and people didn't get into fights. But all this screaming and tearing of hair and, ripping of hats off of other people's heads, it's
hysteria.
Yeah,
it's really hysterical. It's I don't know what to say about it. But I guess it's good for all the psychologists and counselors in the drug industry.
Yeah,
and that's also like part of the left's game right there. Not really the psychiatric drugs issue, but definitely psychiatrists are mostly lefties, counselors are mostly lefties. So it's kind of like they take care of themselves. They generate more jobs and more money for them. They know what their angles are. And I give the left credit; they're much better at fighting and getting money and steering it to their own groups, and the right just doesn't seem to have the guts to just say, all right, well, let's cut their money, let's cut their funding, let's cut Planned Parenthood, and let them stop using public funds to promote their propaganda. And,
do you remember Jesse Ventura? Was an actor.
Oh, yeah.
And he's famous for the line, "I ain't got time to bleed" from Predator. And then he was elected a governor. And I remember this video where he was dealing with this group of women demonstrators who were just demanding that the state pay for child care of babies they'd had out of wedlock. And Jesse Ventura said something which just makes a lot of common sense, which is, why is the government on the hook for the poor life decisions you made? And of course they screamed, and he was voted out next term. But that's really what it comes on down to. The reason the left has all this money is they're constantly demanding the government give them all kinds of stuff. And I think conservatives, by and large, don't want to do that. They don't want to take money from the government because they understand that with that money comes control.
Well, both sides seem to be working for more state power. It's all about increasing the power of the state, and that's what scares me. Also, people talk about a civil war. If there's a civil war, the people some people think, oh well, we'll overthrow the tyrannical whatever. It's just going to increase. That's why the left would love a civil war, because anytime there's a civil war, the winner is state power. You come out of it with a lot less rights, and the government comes out with a ton more power. So to people that think about that, it might be forced upon us, but at the same time, it should be avoided at all costs, because the winner will be the state, and it'll just get bigger and more intrusive. And
yeah. Like I've been saying all along, I would like to avoid a civil war or a revolution here in the United States of America, because the wrong people get harmed in such things. And if there is going to be a civil war, again, it's not like there's going to be a border or a line between seceding states and the Union. It's basically going to be all these badly factionalized groups, these intentionally factionalized groups. Gays against the straights, blacks against the white, men against women, young against the old. They're going to be fighting each other in the streets, and it's going to be hard to see, who is doing what.
Well, I believe in karma and the way we sow chaos around the world, and what we're doing in Venezuela now, and in the Middle East, what we've done to the Middle East. It just seems like, you reap what you sow sooner or later. So I just worry for this country that we have to pay for our sins one of these days.
I think the bill is about to come due.
Yep. Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you letting me talk.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Hang on. I shouldn't have done that. We're just a little bit away from a new commercial break here. And apparently, Trumpers are setting up their own Yelp for restaurants that are friendly to Make America Great Again hats and clothing, because of all of these anti-Trumpers, never-Trumpers that are committing assaults and just beating up on people wearing the hats. So now they're setting up a Yelp. You want to go out for a meal, you go to this MAGA-friendly Yelp, and you know you can go someplace where you're going to be left alone to enjoy your meal. All right, now's the commercial break. We're going to take a break. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Raleigh in Minnesota. Aloha, Raleigh. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm calling from the state where actually Jesse Ventura was governor. I don't know if you ever had the privilege to meet him.
We had him on the show.
Oh, wow. I got to meet him in person during a book signing. I was not living in Minnesota when he was governor, and people tend to talk about it like it was a dark McCarthyian time. Right now in Minnesota, you could really see that third wave of feminist ideology just splashed all over the state of Minnesota. This is an ideology that would have been confined to lesbian bars if it wasn't for the mainstream media, itself. And I'm a victim of it too. Like, my wife finished college. I didn't finish, and I funded her. I paid for her book because I love her to go to school. And now she could come up with ways of hating me and creative ways that I could have never thought of. And it's all due to the power of the minds of Princeton.
Well, again, yeah, what he said made a lot of sense, and it was his misfortune to be a conservative in a state that was swinging to liberalism. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This is when this wave of feminism and women deserve this and women deserve that, and okay. And I'm sorry, I'm multitasking. I'm dealing with something in the control room. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I like Jesse Ventura. I'm sorry that he did not continue in politics, but I did like what it was he was saying. Why is the government supposed to be responsible for paying for the poor choices people make? But then again, that's the whole point of the nanny state. Get everybody dependent on the government. No matter what you do, government will take care of it as long as you do what the government says.
You're absolutely correct, and if you think about like what's going on, where people are actually arguing the point, like the sexes don't exist anymore. This third wave of feminism, and like college campuses, like you just mentioned, I envision a time where, like, I hate to see the fourth wave, where people reflect on this time as a time of patriarchy, but. Michael, I was actually calling in to talk about Edward Snowden. May I ask you one quick question and I'll get off the air?
Sure.
So Edward Snowden is in the news every day.
Yes.
But it's not in the mainstream media inside of the United States. I got him on Google Alert. He pops up in India all the time. And it's about the Asar mass surveillance system, which is like a biometric system that's supposedly like threatening the civil rights of Indians nowadays. Is he fanning the flames of like a uprising inside of India, do you believe? Or do you think that it's basically to the benefit of the party inside of India, not the detriment?
I think Snowden is doing what he always does, which is calling the public's attention to ever more government intrusiveness into our lives. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. Getting on back to the news here. Everybody's now talking about Donald Trump's new budget. He is showering the Pentagon with cash, very obviously preparing for war. The Pentagon is now in turn setting up its own agency, if you will, its own bureau, to loan money to other countries to buy American weapons. So you can have Armageddon on credit. Anyway, needless to say, the Democratic leaders are announcing Trump's budget. Trump is calling it a budget for a better America. I think it would be more appropriate to call it a budget for a better bomb. And it looks like at some point there may be yet another shutdown because the Democratic leadership is not going to go for this. A lot of the budget cuts hit programs Democrats absolutely rely on. Now, Trump has cut foreign aid spending. He did boost border security and more money to counter Russia in the 2020 budget. And I am willing to bet that somehow Israel's foreign aid escaped getting cut. We're going to take a phone call now from Tom in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day to you, Michael. Yeah, Michael, I believe I saw it on Breitbart. I can't remember, but it was 2 days ago. I heard at CNN and a lot of these Hollywood celebs and all these, I think it was the Post, they're going to end up having to settle with this guy Salmon for like $40 million. The kid from the Catholic Church there.
Yes.
That's I believe that's in their best interest to settle with this young man, because what they did do to him was assassinate him in that school, actually. And that's going to be really interesting to see if CNN and all these other DEMA liberals are going to pay this young man off. And I believe that, I guess they're going for $250 million, but they'll probably end up settling for like $40 million. That's one heck of a payoff for that young man, wouldn't you think?
Well, I don't think the young man is doing it for the money. I think he's doing it because he's making a point that the corporate media has become reckless and irresponsible. And I hope they stick it out and go for the entire $250 million. Well,
I do too, Michael. But I think they're going to probably end up settling like I read an article, I believe it was for $40 million. He's going to end up with quite a bit, I'm sure. But also, not only that, Michael, this Juicy Smollett guy, this
Jesse.
This guy, the Juicy or Jesse? I don't know how to pronounce
Jesse.
it. Juicy, isn't it?
Listen, Jesse. Yeah.
Okay, Jesse. Okay, I heard some. Never mind, I won't get into that. But I heard somebody call it Juicy. But anyway, the point with him is, I read also, Michael, that since he wrote the letter to himself and he said there was something on it, that he's going to end up paying, he's going to do like 3 years just for that one crime in itself. Federal, the charge for the postal. You heard about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're throwing the book at him.
I mean, forget the two guys that went in there, bought the noose and the rope and the bleach and all that. And by the way, bleach freezes, I checked it out, at 19 degrees. If you have bleach in Chicago that night, it was 17 degrees that night. The bleach would have been frozen. So there's no way anybody could throw bleach on him because it would be frozen like a rock. So that was a lie in itself. That's another, I think, where the cops got him too. But he said he had liquid thrown on him. I don't think so. But if he does get charged with that one crime of the letter, that in itself is, it's unbelievable. And this guy was, according to Michael, this guy was making $1 million a year on that show.
Yes, he was. I mean, talk about somebody just flaming out through one act of idiocy. You know, he was making this money. He was a star. He had a good career ahead of him, and it wasn't enough. And he just said, I'm going to play victim. I got all the credentials. I'm black. I'm gay. I'm this. I'm that. And I'm going to stage a phony hate crime. And my name will be all over the press. And the show will give me more money. And I'll be worth more in the future. And now it's all gone. This guy just flamed out. I mean, in the annals of Hollywood, this one's definitely going to go on down as a record-setting career burnout.
Well, yeah, Michael, but also there was a wonderful blog I read. Well, if this would have happened in the summertime, if this would have happened in like the month of May or June, or even April, where it's warmer out, there would have been rioting in Chicago. The reason there wasn't a big blow-up is because it was very cold in Chicago, so a lot of people were going out, and listen, Michael, he was trying to actually declare a war on the white culture, on Trump supporters. He absolutely was trying to start a war. Can you imagine somebody who would have got murdered because of that? Couple, 4 or 5 people getting murdered because some guy wants vengeance for this guy. I mean, it's unbelievable what this really could have turned out to be.
It could have happened. It could have happened. There would have been a revenge killing. I don't think Jussie really wanted to trigger mass violence. He just, he's already said he just wanted to get his name in the papers, play victim, and try and exploit it to get more money from the show that he's working on. And I mean, this guy was getting, tens of thousands of dollars per episode. This guy had it made. I mean, I can't even imagine making that kind of money. And
exactly,
he just blew it all.
Now, Michael, one more thing. I live in South Florida, as you know. and they had it in our paper here. I won't mention the name unless you want me to, but and one of our we have two major papers here in South Florida, and they mentioned that in Venezuela, what's going down is they have. Listen to what they said, Michael. There's 40,000 supposedly Cubans surrounding Maduro. There's a general there. I don't know if you heard about this, but this general that's in Cuba, this Cuban general, I guess he was in Africa, and they had an article where this guy had turned the missiles downward, and he shot them off like at 10-foot surface to the surface, and multiple rockets. And this was when he was in Africa, and these rockets were like burning through the villages and all that. Did you hear anything about that?
No, I hadn't heard anything about this Cuban general. I'm sure that Maduro is very well protected right now against U.S. assassins, special operations forces, any of Guido's people. And he's right to do that, because don't forget, not too long ago, there was an outright assassination attempt against him using drones.
Well, today there was just breaking all the news that all the diplomats are getting pulled out of Venezuela. I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah, we heard that.
Right.
The Venezuelan government basically said, this is the final deadline, 72 hours, or we're going to throw you in jail. So they're getting the diplomats out of the way. And there was this odd comment that came on out saying, we're getting the diplomats out of the way so that all options are on the table, which sounds to me like they're getting ready to do something really dramatic. And if, in fact, this story turns out to be true, that Maduro's people, that the Venezuelan government, that these two people they arrested, these saboteurs, had these flash drives with the virus on there, Maduro needs to get that out into the world press, or at least the independent media. I mean, the U.S. is going to definitely want to keep that from coming out.
Well, Michael, I got to ask you this, and I'll let you go. What happens if the United States does invade Venezuela? Actually, you're going to have to take over Cuba, too, because the Cubans are back in Venezuela and Maduro.
Yes.
So I believe Trump's going to actually his hand's going to be forced. Not only is he going to have to take out Maduro, he's going to have to go into Cuba and clean that out. He's going to have to. Because, Remember, their military's running Venezuela. So the problem is, like when Reagan had to take out Grenada, because Ronald Reagan said, hey, we got to take Grenada at all costs, and they did. There were a lot of Cubans that got taken out in that invasion. I don't know if you remember that, in the Grenada invasion. But I believe that if they're going to go out, if there's a military intervention into Venezuela, it's also going to be one into Cuba.
I think you're probably right about that. I think you're right about that. Or they may simply blockade Cuba so they can't, come and go. I mean, there's technically already a blockade, but I'm talking about an actual naval blockade of Cuba so that nobody can get in or out. But you're absolutely right. This could erupt to a multi-front war, and it's going to turn into another Vietnam, because what Russia is signaling is they're going to try the Syria gambit and trick the United States into another long-running war of attrition and just grind the United States down as they did in Syria.
Well, Michael, I have to say something about that. I kind of maybe disagree with you on that, because in Cuba, I've been to Cuba many times. And I can tell you, their electrical grid is nothing like Venezuela's. And I tell you what, with our military, they can knock that power grid out in Cuba. Forget it. It would be chaos over there. Yes. I mean, it's already chaos. It's disaster. Okay, I can tell you all about Cuba if you'd like me one day to tell you about it. I've been there many times, and I can tell you right now. And it's a beautiful place, and the people are wonderful. They're very nice over there. Believe me.
Yes.
The average Cubans are wonderful. It really is. And it's a beautiful place, believe it or not. But if our military to take out their power grid, forget it, Michael. It'd be 10 times worse what's going on in Venezuela. So I don't think you'd even have to fire a bullet over in Cuba. Honestly, you just knock their power grid out, and that's it. It's over. They'll capitulate. The Cubans will capitulate. I guarantee it.
Well, the United States military has developed.
You're not going to even try to fight it.
The United States military has developed special bombs that are designed to basically destroy power substations. They're called graphite bombs.
Absolutely.
Basically, when they're falling on down, they have these streamers that are made of carbonized filament that simply drape over the transformers and short them out.
And Michael, I don't think Russia wants to get caught in a quagmire with the United States over Cuba or Venezuela, because it's too far for them. And it's, they'll go bankrupt again like they did the first time when they tried to prop up Cuba. It didn't work when they were the USSR. It didn't work. So,
well, that was the USSR.
I know.
The
United States got the United States is holding aid.
Tom.
Sure.
Let me respond to what you say before you move on here. In the case, Russia may want to just say, we're not interested in Cuba, but Venezuela, Russia has a lot of investments there in the oil infrastructure, and Venezuela and the Venezuelan oil company, they owe Russia a lot of money, and Russia's not going to walk away from that. Plus, Russia's probably thinking at this point that right now the United States is just going to go on picking off country after country after country until the United States and its allies are knocking on Russia's door. And so the old saying they have, better fight them over there than here at home.
I agree with you on that. Totally agree. But I will say, okay, Michael, on the other call, but listen, one more thing, Michael. Remember who found that oil in Venezuela? It wasn't the Venezuelans. It wasn't the Russians. It was a bunch of boys from Texas who went down there and hit that mother lode for Venezuela and let them know what they had underneath their soil and their property, their land, whatever. It was a bunch of good old boys from Texas and maybe some boys from Pennsylvania who found that oil. The Venezuelans didn't find it. The Russians didn't find it. The Chinese didn't find it. It was a bunch of good old boys from the United States of America who found that oil. Otherwise, they wouldn't. They didn't know what they had. So, I'm gonna leave you with that thought, because it was the Caucasians back in the 30s who found that oil in Venezuela.
Yeah, I understand the history of Venezuela's oil, and I also understand that Venezuela, had reason to kick the oil companies out for basically abusing the relationship. The fact of the matter is, right now, that oil belongs to Venezuela. The Venezuelan oil company belongs to Venezuela. They have a strong financial entanglement with Russia, and I think that's going to bring Russia in. I don't want to see it, but I think that's where this is headed. Anyway, thank you very much for the phone call,
Sicko.
Tom.
You're talking about Sicko. Correct. Sicko. Right.
We're going to let you go, okay? And do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And let's see, let's talk about the economy. As you probably heard, they were celebrating 20,000 new jobs added last month, which, as an earlier caller pointed out, was way, way below what they'd been claiming before. And the excuse being given is that, well, employers can't find workers. We're so close to total employment that there are just no people out there. Well, we know that's a joke here. The reality is that last month there were 76,835 jobs lost, mostly in retail, from all these retailers that are collapsing here. And over at shtfplan.com, they have an article with a video in which the Federal Reserve admits there's a massive number of Americans who are not working. Our economy is in a crisis, and you should not let the platitudes of the corporate media and the government convince you otherwise. Because if you're caught off guard, you'll be hurt a lot more. Okay, another article from Investment Watch blog. Precious metals analyst says gold's recent dip is only temporary. Well, we know that the metal prices are being manipulated, mostly silver and gold, and eventually it'll get to the others. And you can almost look at the price of gold on a chart, and it's a sawtooth. It'll go up and up and up and up and up and up, and then all of a sudden there's a push down. Then it'll go up and up and up and up and up and up. Then there's another push down. And to me, that's clearly a sign that this is being manipulated. Now, there's a new term of craft that is making its way around the financial centers, and it's called modern monetary theory. And it's the idea that the government can print money to spark the economy. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because it's just another name for quantitative easing. So we're back to that whole situation. They're just going to inflate their way out of the problem. They're going to go on inflating until the value of a dollar is virtually zero. We're going to wind up in Zimbabwe territory where we're walking around with pieces of paper in our pocket that say $100 trillion on them. Or rather, $100 billion, although this one only says $10 billion. That's ultimately where we're headed. Another little article coming on out here from Activist Post talking about how many of the world's so-called leading banks keep getting caught up in these money laundering scandals to the tune of $2 trillion a year. Now, the most recent one was called the Troika Laundromat Affair, and it added another $8 billion to the trillions financial institutions wash every year. So the banks are hand in glove with the drug runners, the tax avoiders, the terrorists. And it proves this little t-shirt is absolutely right. Jesse James was correct. The real outlaws are the bankers. Okay, another article here talking about how Xi Jinping is getting ready to arrive in Italy for an official visit on March 22nd. And the top theme of discussion will be Italy's desire to join with the One Belt, One Road project. And of course, the U.S. is frothing over that. They can't compete. They've neglected the infrastructure. They're coming from a position behind. The United States may slap sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is supposed to supply Russian gas to Germany via the Baltic Sea. This is coming from U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry. And, of course, this is straining relations between Washington, D.C. and Berlin, with Washington, D.C. saying, don't you dare buy oil and gas from Russia. You buy only from us and our friends. Don't you dare do business with them. It's becoming a consistent theme. Can't be competitive in business, be coercive. All right. Now then, getting into the immigration situation, there's this illegal alien. He's been deported twice from the United States, keeps coming on back in. Eliezer Marino Tetlactl. He's a 25-year-old illegal alien from Mexico, and he's pled guilty to illegally re-entering the U.S. in the Western District of Louisiana this week. He's also accused of child sex crimes. So how's that open border thing working out for you? Okay. Getting on over to Great Britain, Parliament is having a raucous time dealing with Brexit. And this is going to be the week that decides what's really going to happen. So apparently the Remainers are still trying to find a way to head it off or delay it. And tensions are high. More about this when we come back from these commercials. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And we're talking about Brexit, and it's getting very, very intense. And apparently, Prime Minister Theresa May has agreed to a legally binding deal with the European Union around the Northern Ireland backstop in order to secure Brexit. We'll put that to a vote in the Parliament, which happened today, and talks are still ongoing. And it's very intense, and I imagine it's probably fun to watch as well, because as you understand, the Parliament, they don't have the same rules as the Congress. The Congress has a set of rules where, you know, people don't yell, they don't scream, they don't throw things. Parliament's a bit more of a circus here. But apparently, Parliament was looking at this plan, and if there is no agreement on the divorce plan with the EU, Parliament will be holding a vote on a no-deal Brexit tomorrow. If this option is also rejected, there'll be a vote on Thursday to extend the Article 50 period beyond the 29th of March, at which point I'm expecting the British people will be in the streets on Friday wearing their yellow vests. So apparently the vote was held. The British Parliament has again rejected Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal. And Corbyn says it's time for a general election. It's time for Theresa May to step down. She's made a total mess of things. Over in Germany, the most likely successor of Chancellor Angela Merkel, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, has rejected French President Macron's vision of a European Union, rejecting this idea of a more centralized European Union government, which, as it turns out, was the plan all along, to get all these nations of Europe into one union and then impose a central government over them all. So I think if in fact that this Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer does become the chancellor, we're going to see Germany's attitude toward the EU and open borders change dramatically. But all over Europe, populists and nationalists are sweeping the elections. And Brussels is in a panic. George Soros is crying, kicking his pets. It's all coming apart. All right, so let's talk about this college cheating scam. And I think the reason it's getting so much media sizzle is it involved a couple of Hollywood minor mid-level celebrities. I'd actually, to be honest, hadn't heard their names before. But actresses Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin were among more than 4 dozen people charged in this nationwide college admissions cheating scandal that involved wealthy individuals paying up to $6.5 million to place their children into the elite universities like Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, University of Southern California, UCLA, and the University of Texas. Now, this was all run by this guy in California, William Rick Singer, who helped these parents get their children into the schools through bribes. And apparently this is the end of a year-long investigation. It is the largest admissions cheating scandal that has ever been uncovered. For some reason, Cher seems to want to get back in the news a lot these days, and she's getting more and more extreme to do that. She suggested in a recent social media post that women create laws over men's bodies, like banning the use of Viagra and the death penalty for men who use massage parlors. She says men must be circumcised and show papers or the penis. Now, Cher, as a friend, and we actually did meet once many, many years ago, no matter how late you are running in the morning, you must stop drying your hair in the microwave oven. It is really beginning to show. Now, if you want equality between men and women, you go for equality, but you don't get equality by trying to reverse the previous order and say, now it's our turn and we'll be abusive and we'll be whatever. Let's talk about Captain Marvel. The reviews are terrible. This one was a YouTube video saying Captain Marvel is the worst Marvel Comics Universe movie yet. And there's a lot of people who are just going on social media to vent their concern about it after it's come on out that Rotten Tomatoes was deleting negative reviews. And this other article that came on out, and again, it's a YouTube video, was showing how Rotten Tomatoes is loading up with fake positive reviews of Captain Marvel. And you know they are fake positive reviews because they're identical. And this guy just went down, scrolling down the positive reviews, showing same exact text in review after review after review under all these phony identities. So Rotten Tomatoes is absolutely unreliable to find out whether or not a movie is worth seeing. And I think what's going on is this movie is pushing so much of the anti-white, pro-feminist propaganda. They want everybody to see it, or at least not to lose their shirts on the production budget. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Over in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo, a while back, issued a state ban on travel to North Carolina in protest of its controversial transgender bathroom policy. Now, this is the same guy who last January signed a policy allowing abortion right up to the moment of birth. But he basically issued this executive order banning travel to North Carolina in response to North Carolina passing a law mandating public restroom use corresponding to the user's birth sex. So we're strike a blow for political correctness and liberalism. It's unfortunately had some side effects here. Because swimmers and divers from the State University of New York at Geneseo can't stay in Greensboro for the NCAA Division III championships later this month. They have to stay across the state line in Virginia, an hour away from the tournament site. Didn't really think this one all the way through, did ya? And anyway, a couple of stinky badge stories. Down in Florida, there is a police officer, actually he's a sergeant, Lionel Marines. And this guy was on the force for 12 years. He's now resigned because he was caught using the police department's confidential database to hunt for women to date. And apparently he used the database to contact at least 150 women to ask them out, until finally the parents of some of these women began to complain and say, what's going on? Because he'd show up in his uniform, say, I need to talk to this lady. And it sort of came to a head where there was he met this lady in a parking lot, then followed her home in the police cruiser, and basically went up to the house to try and talk to her. And the family complained. Somebody did a little digging and discovered this guy had just been going through the database looking for potential dates. We don't know how many he actually got. Probably not all that many, or he wouldn't have had to go back 150 times. Alrighty, over in Columbus, Ohio, at the Columbus Police Department, 30-year veteran of the police department, 55-year-old Andrew Mitchell, has been arrested for kidnapping several women under the guise of making an arrest before forcing them to have sex with him in exchange for their release. Now, the guy has been placed on desk duty, and apparently this is tangled up in the Stormy Daniels case at the Columbus Strip Club. So, anyway, and this guy was actually on the Vice unit. It's amazing here. All right, Ron Paul is out with a new article, new warning, talking about how the attacks on the Second Amendment are becoming bipartisan. We're used to the Democrats and liberals screaming, take the guns, take the guns, take the guns. It is a new phenomenon to all of a sudden see the GOP coming on board with these bans on certain accessories, certain firearms, and the national background check system, which is about to be expanded. And this new system will require almost everyone selling firearms, including private collectors who supplement their incomes by selling firearms at gun shows, to perform background checks on the potential buyers. Well, people who are likely to shoot up a shopping mall aren't going to do it with a collectible weapon. That's a little bit of silliness right there. But the bill has a section purporting to bar creation of a national firearms registry. Well, how are you going to have an expanded background check system without some form of keeping records of those buying and selling the guns? In other words, this expanded background check system creates a de facto national gun registry. And I know gun ownership is a complex issue. And I know that we want the bad people and the crazy people to not have access to guns. But I know that the reason that the Founding Fathers gave us that Second Amendment, acknowledging our natural right to be armed in our own defense, is what keeps us safe. We are allowed to protect our homes from criminals in an age where the average response time for a 911 call is around 20 minutes. And as Thomas Jefferson himself wrote, the purpose of the Second Amendment is so that the people, when confronted with tyrannical government, may hold it at bay. And we're certainly being confronted right now. Getting on over to the internet here, somebody just basically came on in and they found a critical backdoor in the Swiss online voting system. And apparently it would let somebody alter votes undetected. Boy, sounds like a Diebold machine to me. So they had planned to roll out the system in real elections this year. That is now on hold. Another story that's coming on out from Tom's Guide. Austrian antivirus testing lab AV Comparative tested 250 antivirus apps in Google Play against 2,000 malware samples. They found that only 80 of the apps could stop even a minimal amount of malware. Less than 1 in 10 of the apps tested defended against all 2,000 malicious apps, while over 2/3 failed to reach a block rate of even 30%. Okay, there was one more down here. We were talking about this Yelp for conservatives, the MAGA Yelp. Well, apparently it's been discovered it wasn't correctly coded. It's leaking information as well. Good idea, poor implementation. Right now, there's a fight over who is going to control the global internet. Right now, it's under the control of the United States, and a lot of other countries are not happy about that. They're concerned the internet could be weaponized, the way the U.S. government has weaponized pretty much everything else. So the Russian State Duma has passed 2 bills designed to do 2 things. Halt the spread of fake news and keep people from spreading information that disrespects the government. This has triggered protests across Russia. So last Sunday they had a major protest over Russia's growing censorship. Because that's what they mean, disrespecting the government. You can't criticize the government. Now, Russia, unfortunately, does not have a Bill of Rights the way we do. Anyway, over at Facebook, and we knew this was coming. First, they came for the conservatives. Now they're coming for vaccines. Facebook is starting to completely ban pages, threads that they claim are spreading misinformation about vaccines. You will buy the medicine. You will stick it in your child's arm here. Pinterest has joined in. They're blocking tags about vaccine safety. Now, Facebook may have stepped over a line because they removed Senator Elizabeth Warren's ads calling for the breakup of social media giants and Amazon and Google because they've bulldozed the competition and used private information for profit. But apparently it was a little too high profile, and those ads are in fact an official part of Elizabeth Warren's campaign. And so they have renabled the ads and wiped the egg off of their face here. Google has announced they will derank all articles from Russia Today to make them harder to find. Well, it's not going to be that harder. Type in the subject that you're looking for and follow it with site, site:/rt.com. And all that will come up will be articles from Russia Today. So for anybody who knows how to use Google, and by the way, that trick works with other search engines as well, but you can bypass this filtering and deranking. Again, speaking of Google, apparently 2 top executives were accused of sexual misconduct, and they have been given severance packages totaling $135 million. And apparently Amit Singh was offered $45 million by Alphabet, which is Google's parent firm, after he was accused of groping a colleague at a boozy off-site event for the company. And details of the exit package were revealed as part of a shareholder lawsuit against the company, one that followed a published report of payouts Google made to executives accused of sexual misconduct. Now, you know, I absolutely loved the film, The Internship. But clearly, the real Google is nothing at all like what was portrayed in the film, which is a shame. I mean, the movie made me want to work there. I mean, even though I know we're adversaries in the infosphere, but it just looked like this wonderful, cool place to work. Alrighty, Amazon is now censoring the vaccine debate. All books and films that question forced vaccination have been removed from sale. Big Pharma is worried about its profits, and who cares if people are getting sick? It's all about the money here. And yes, here we are, March 12th, and it's still snowing. Over in Denver, they're expecting 6 inches of snow on the city itself, 15 inches in the mountains. And there's another storm coming on in that will impact the United States with heavy snow and severe thunderstorms. So this is going to be moving up from northwest Mexico, southwest U.S. into the southern to central plains Wednesday and Thursday. And it's just going to be another mess. It's going to be another mess. Over in Great Britain, they're expecting heavy snow. Britain is plunging into another prolonged deep freeze. They're expecting the lows to hit minus 14 degrees centigrade. Now, there's this interesting little app that was intended to counter climate alarmism. It's called Inconvenient Facts, and all of a sudden, it's available only to Android users through the Google Play Store. Since March 4th, users of Apple's iPhone can no longer access the app through the App Store. So the censorship is spreading. Now they're coming after those who doubt the most holy revealed wisdom of St. Al of the Gore. And I'm expecting that in all probability it will vanish from the Google Play Store as well. That's what's coming on down. All of these tech giants, they're being brought on in to the official view. And that's the only thing that will be tolerated. I remember when there was a politician who said, you know, the internet's like the Wild West and everybody's just out there saying anything that they want. We've got to bring them. Well, that's what's going on. It's a dictatorship. No freedom of speech. And we're supposed to have freedom of speech. That's what the First Amendment is for. But the defenders of all these tech giants are out there saying, well, these are private companies. They can choose who they want to do business with and who they don't want to do business with. And what's really ironic, these are the same people who screamed bloody murder when a Christian baker refused to make a cake for a gay couple who wanted to get married. You can't have it both ways. If a private business has a right to decide who they're going to do business with, then leave the bakers alone. What I don't understand is why Trump is ignoring this. And I'm sure he's very happy over there on Twitter. They're not filtering him, at least not that we know. But he's turning his back on the independent media. And he seems to have forgotten, or maybe he never really comprehended, just what an important role the independent media played in getting him his current gig. And I don't know about anybody else in the independent media, but I'm not feeling motivated to go through that again in 2020 because it was a lot of work. Over at the AFL-CIO, they sent a letter to Democratic New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Democratic Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, who are the two lawmakers leading this Green New Deal push in Congress, and basically slammed the Green New Deal for combating climate change by threatening the livelihoods of millions of Americans. I mean, if you look at the Green New Deal, it sounds good. It's a great little soundbite. It is totally unworkable. and it is going to be an economic disaster. And you can't combat climate change because the climate changes all the time naturally. Right now, we're going into a cooling phase, the grand solar minimum. And by the way, as a side note, the month of February, there wasn't a single sunspot on the face of the sun. It's been quite a few years since that happened. Okay, Trump's 2020 NASA budget, unfortunately, was cut. It's going to cancel 3 NASA science missions: the Wide Field Infrared Survey Telescope and 2 Earth science missions. And this wasn't the first time the Trump administration tried to axe the Wide Field Infrared Survey Telescope. And this is a $3.2 billion flagship class astrophysics mission that had already had to deal with budget cuts. So, according to NASA's summary of the budget request, the Trump administration is proposing to terminate the W-1 mission and instead focus on completing the much delayed and over-budget James Webb Space Telescope, which I would like to see that happen. But unfortunately, the budget axe has fallen on NASA, and I certainly know what that feels like, because after Apollo was over and we beat those Soviets to the moon, the budget axe fell on NASA really, really hard. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. We're going to take one more phone call, and that's from Patrick in Northern California. Aloha, Patrick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah. Hey, I read a report the other day about the clouded leopards from Taiwan, and the name of the study is called Molecular Evidence of Species Level Distinctions in Clouded Leopards. And I want to read you just a small paragraph from page 9 of that report. This is a government report, by the way.
Okay.
A U.S. government report. It says, we estimate the Bornean clouded leopards diverged from mainland populations during the, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this word right, but it's the Pleistocene period, about 1 million years ago, when reoccurring episodes of global cooling and warming created opportunities for population isolations. So this is a report from the government, actually, and it's so 1 million years ago they were talking about these global warming and cooling periods. So,
well, I mean, it's recorded in the geological and paleontological records that yes, the Earth goes through these global and warming and cooling periods. We had the Roman warming period, we had the medieval warming period. We're going into another cooling period, and then of course we have the really big changes, which are the ice ages, and it happened last weekend. Apparently, the earlier crash, that happened last November. Boeing appeared to have actually identified this cause of the problem. And there is this sensor, it's called the angle of attack sensor, which basically tells the airplane what angle it's at relative to the airflow. And Boeing actually issued a directive to all operators of the 737 MAX airlines to use existing flight crew procedures in instances when the sensor is providing false readings. And apparently what Boeing was saying was that erroneous input from the angle of attack sensor would cause the airplane to nose down. But apparently, looking at this article, it doesn't look like anybody said, hey, let's replace those angle of attack sensors. But it looks like that would absolutely produce what was being reported by the pilots. They were trying to climb the aircraft, and the aircraft kept pushing over. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Use private email, paper mail, talk to each other, bring back the art of the conversation. Forget about social media. It is they're just clamping down on anything which threatens the government or Israel or anybody's corporate profits. It's a complete waste of time there. So we'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.